On Focus this evening, we look at secret surveillance in our society here in the United States. New technology has made it much easier for law enforcement officials to collect evidence for trials. The tiny and powerful microphones and cameras do their job well. Indeed, they do it too well for some critics who fear it can lead to invasion of privacy. Here's our law correspondent, Star Jones.
They were watching on the streets of Los Angeles when this decoy car was broken into. Their eyes and ears were in a Washington hotel room when Marion Barry lit a crack pipe. They watched and listened as John Gotti and his cronies walked the streets of New York. And when this car was wired for sound during an investigation, the leaders of 5 of New York's most powerful organized crime families were brought down. Since the early 1970s, the use of wiretaps and electronic surveillance has become a major weapon in law enforcement's fight against crime. Last year alone, using electronic surveillance, the government intercepted 1.7 million conversations, 3 times the number recorded 10 years ago. In the mid-'80s, the red tape got shorter, and requests for court orders came pouring in from both federal and state law enforcement agencies. And with organized crime on the rise, those in law enforcement say without electronic surveillance, they wouldn't stand a chance against the sophisticated crime networks of today. Ronald Goldstock has headed the New York State Organized Crime Task Force since 1981.
When we're dealing with conspiratorial crime, when consenting people engage in complex criminal activity, electronic surveillance is often the only tool that's available to find out precisely what those people are saying, what they're doing, and how they're carrying out that criminal activity.
This is a pencil sharpener, which belongs in the office, but if you look at the monitor, the lens is where the pencil should go.
Michael Goodrich is president of a company that deals in high-tech surveillance equipment. Goodrich sells state-of-the-art surveillance devices to law enforcement agencies. Microphones smaller than a fingernail. Cameras tiny enough to mount in a light switch. Microphones hidden in umbrellas that can pick up conversations over 100 feet away. Working calculators that can pick up every sound in a room.
Microphones have gotten better, and miniaturization has made them easier to conceal. The recording quality that's available now is far superior, so we can identify more easily what the alleged criminals are saying.
I want to grow marijuana. Oh.
High-tech electronic surveillance does have its critics. Those who say it allows overzealous law enforcement officers to engage in no more than court-sanctioned fishing expeditions. And even proponents admit that electronic surveillance can at times invade the privacy of innocent citizens. Technology has shown what can be done. Civil libertarians ask if it should be done. Star Jones, NBC News, New York.
And we'll get one expert's view on that, the possible invasion of privacy, as we continue. A moment ago, we saw how eavesdropping technology is a big help in catching and convicting criminals. But is there also a risk of an invasion of a person's privacy? Herman Schwartz is professor of law at American University in Washington and a specialist on government surveillance and individual rights. Professor, we just saw how the number of intercepts, electronic intercepts, taps has soared in the past 10 years. Does that bother you?
Oh, yes, it bothers me a great deal because each one of these taps always catches a great many conversations, a good many of whom, by simply the nature of the instrument, will be innocent, either both people or conversations.
But the fact is, it is probably also capturing that key evidence that can be used in court. We saw how racketeers, members of the mafia, have been convicted on the basis of this. So doesn't it serve a very important social purpose in this country?
Yes, but I think many of us are concerned about indiscriminate use. What we saw on the screen were going after big-time gangsters, but if you look at the numbers, they're essentially a huge increase in connection with drug prosecutions and certain kinds of racketeering prosecutions, which under the definition of racketeering can reach a great many non-organized crime situations. And I think many of us are concerned that the instrument is there, it's getting cheaper, easier to use, so it's being resorted to even when it isn't necessary.
We saw one vivid example there, an umbrella that can record conversations up to 100 feet away. Many people may be surprised by that. Now, a lot of incidental information will come in. Is there any evidence that this information, that is not the target victim, him or herself, is being used by law enforcement officials?
Well, a lot of that, by its very nature, is hard to test, whether it's being used or abused. But the fact is that there is a certain right of privacy, which, regardless of whether it's actually abused for either blackmail or extortion or whatever other improper purposes, simply does invade some of the most intimate parts of our lives. In addition to which, we do know that there are times, and perhaps they happen frequently, it's hard to know, that lawyer-client conversations and other very confidential conversations are indeed intercepted and overheard.
All right, but where do we draw the balance? We want to protect our privacy. Every individual wants that. We also want to put the bad guys in jail, get them convicted. Where do you draw that line?
Well, I think we probably draw the same line, but the point is that as the law stands at the moment, as I think your program pointed out, it's probably much too easy, particularly for state officials, it's much too easy to get permission to wiretap. Those of us who were opposed to it came to be opposed to it primarily because it was used, or at least available, for far too many purposes.
All right. Professor Schwartz in Washington, thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with a look at the week to come.